Thank you very much, Steve and Diana. That was excellent. Why don't we invite our next panel to come forward? We're going to add some chairs here. While they're making their way up, just wanted to announce that we have some policy tours on Wednesday and Thursday. And if you haven't had a chance to sign up, we still have a few openings. So if you're interested, please check with the Reg desk and we can get you signed in. You get through. You don't want anybody to fall off the stage. All right, our next session is Trade at a Crossroads, Navigating Tariff Stability and Economic Resilience in the PNWER region. And this session is sponsored by the Cruise Line Industry Association. It's been a great partner for many years. I'd like to first introduce our moderator, Rachel Smith. Rachel's the president and CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, where she leads advocacy for 2,500 businesses and 750,000 employees. With over 20 years of experience in government, policy, and business leadership, she's known for building coalitions, advancing major investments, and championing inclusive economic growth across the region. So Rachel, I'll hand the mic to you and you can introduce the panel.
Great. Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's absolutely delightful to be here with all of you. As was said, my name is Rachel Smith, President and CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. And it is great to be here and welcome you all to this important conversation. I'm going to just say a couple of words and then introduce the panelists. So we're here today because the Pacific Northwest and the greater PNWER region is facing a pivotal moment. Global trade is being reshaped by tariffs, supply chain pressures, climate imperatives, and rising economic uncertainty. And these challenges test the resilience of our region's economy, our infrastructure, and our ability to adapt. But despite all of that, there is opportunity. If we act together, we can turn those headwinds into momentum. I really do believe that. And here in PNWER, we have an edge. We know how to collaborate and how to achieve big things, even in the most trying of circumstances. And at the Seattle Metro Chamber, we believe that long-term resilience depends on three things: regional collaboration, smart investment, and proactive policy. Cross-border and regional collaboration across the border is essential because Washington State's economy is tied directly to British Columbia and beyond. We see collaboration in the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, where we jointly work on clean energy, life sciences, tech talent, and all of that is helping to position the region as a global leader in innovation. However, across Cascadia, we see these persistent challenges in ensuring affordability, safety, and healthy communities. When we have wildfires and floods, they don't stop at the border, and we have to pull together with governments, businesses, labor, and community to address these kinds of threats to our economic stability. We also need to make smart investments to support the region in moving people, goods, and ideas. We have advocated for federal and state funding to support investments in transportation and efforts to modernize border crossings and customs protocols. High-speed rail is a key component of that vision for us, connecting cities across Cascadia. And, we really believe in building a connected, sustainable, and globally competitive region for the next generations as well. We also need proactive policy to stay ahead of the rapidly shifting landscape so our businesses and communities aren't just constantly playing catch up. Policy uncertainty, tariffs, tax regimes, regulatory environment can discourage investment at a time when our region urgently needs capital to meet a lot of our demands, whether it's housing, energy, or transportation. We actively engage in federal and binational advocacy with our counterparts in Portland and Vancouver, including Bridget, to work to align priorities and ensure the region's voice is heard in Washington, D.C. and in Ottawa. Most importantly, we believe resilience must reach everyone, not just large exporters, not just the urban centers, but also the small businesses, the rural employers, and emerging industries. Washington's small business owners often face the greatest barriers to accessing trade opportunities, especially when navigating financing, logistics, international regulations. And the Chamber is always working to advocate for programs that expand access to capital, and initiatives that boost export readiness, including things like technical assistance programs that help businesses enter those global markets. And as we look ahead to big global moments like the 2026 Men's FIFA World Cup, where we will see tens of thousands of visitors, international visitors, pass through our region, cross-border coordination, infrastructure readiness, and shared economic identity really becomes even more important. So today's conversation is going to really show what that looks like in practice. And you're going to hear from our four remarkable leaders who are not just talking about trade policy, but are showing what collaboration really does look like on the ground. You're going to hear about economic trends shaping our region's future and see how our cross-border business relationships are evolving, the Port of Seattle's work on sustainability and partnerships, and the legal and policy frameworks that are keeping our region competitive in a volatile global economy. So I am honored to introduce this outstanding panel. So first, we're going to hear from Steve Scranton, Chief Economist at Washington Trust Bank, who will ground us in the macroeconomic trends shaping the trade environment. Then we'll hear from Bridget Anderson, President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, who will offer a cross-border business perspective from Canada. Bridget will be followed by Steve Metruk, Executive Director at the Port of Seattle and Seattle Metro Chamber Board member, who will share how ports are advancing regional growth through sustainability and joint infrastructure efforts. And then finally, and Dan, tell me if I get your name right, Dan Uchizo? Utso. Okay, sorry about that. Senior counsel at Thompson Hine, who will bring it all together, offering insights on the legal and policy frameworks that shape trade and investments across North America. So here's how we're going to kind of spend our time. Each panelist will do some brief opening remarks about the partnerships and progress already happening on the ground, as I mentioned. Then we're going to come together for a conversation. I'm going to ask some questions, and then you will have the opportunity to ask some questions about how we can take these ideas to really further strengthen our region's long-term resilience. So we're going to dive in, and Steve, I'm going to hand it to you first.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. In the 5 minutes that I've got, what I want to do is give you a couple thoughts about the regional economies within PNWER. Talk about 3 areas that we should pay attention to as potential threats, and then leave you 4 takeaways or thoughts to be thinking about for the future. So the simple message I would give you when I look at all the economies within the PNWER region, the 5 states of the United States plus the provinces in Canada and territories in Canada, my simple message is, despite all the noise, besides all the concerns and the uncertainty going on from the political front, the economies of this region are still growing. And I would give you the evidence of that is when I look at the results of the year-over-year economic growth for the end of the first quarter in the US. What I would tell you is every single state in our PNWER region had positive economic growth. We know the first quarter was a distortion. That's why I look at year-over-year growth. So we've had positive growth. When we look at the Canadian story, we see that all 3 of the provinces of Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan had positive growth, but we did see some slightly negative growth out of the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. So that's the base we start with. I would say, especially for the US, we're starting with that. Now we have the potential stimulus and even threats from the new Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed, and see what that does for the economy. But we didn't start at a negative point. We've started positively. The 3 areas that I think we need to pay attention to, I always pay attention to the consumer, because the consumer is the engine of growth for the economies. And where I worry about for the consumer is the consumer's inflation rate is not the official inflation rate. I track 27 categories within the Consumer Price Index that are all areas of what I call core expenses the consumer has to spend on, like rent, daycare, insurance, utilities, things like that. What I would tell you is that 18 of those 27 categories had year-over-year growth of more than the 2% goal that the Fed wants to achieve. 15 of those 18 had growth rates above 3%, and 10 of those 18 were above 4%. So the consumer is being impacted much more by inflation than what the headlines may imply. I would simply say the lowest income people are getting crushed by that, And then if they start to, default and things like that, it will flow upwards. So we need to pay attention to that. The second threat, I think, is more of the macro threat. We've heard lots of discussion about that now, is this elevated level of uncertainty. Because what I hear in talking with our businesses throughout the region is a lot of saying, I just can't plan if I don't know what it's going to be. So maybe I'll just sit and wait. So maybe we do get clarity on tariffs come August 1st. But bottom line is, the more that we see consumers or businesses take a wait and see attitude, that's a headwind or an anchor to economic growth. And we don't want that momentum to build that way. The last thing I would say is that it's real easy to focus on the negatives, because we know that bad news sells and that your electronic devices are being fed 24/7 negative news on a constant basis. I'm going to tell you, there is plenty of good news underneath the surface, but it takes more work to find that. And I think that is something that I would say, is that if people get sucked into the black hole of negativity, then they start making irrational decisions and things like that. So I would really say that's some area that we need to really see businesses especially, but all of you as leaders, to be the voice of reason for your employees, your customers, and your clients, of highlighting what is working and those types of things. So when they come into you about all the scary stuff, you can counter that. I've always said, be that rock in the river that everything flows around. And that is something that I would say we need to see. Because my 4 takeaways for you as we look at the economy, and then these panelists, rest of the panelists will talk about trade specifically. I would say, 1, if you want to know what's going on with the economy around you, pay attention to what's happening to your business, your clients, and your vendors' businesses, because you will get a real life indicator way before you get it from the national news or economic data and things like that. Second thing I would tell you is absolutely plan for the threats. I've always said you should have an economic disaster recovery plan, just like you do for an environmental one. That way, if those threats materialize, you can respond objectively because you've got a game plan already. Third thing I would say is focus on the positives. Identify them, communicate them, help that so that people are focusing on what's working. And finally, as you've heard twice already from the ambassador and from Steve, is that change is clearly happening. It's going to continue to happen, but what we know for sure is out of change comes opportunities. Are you going to be one who's taking advantage of those opportunities because you're looking for them, or are you going to be mired in the black hole of the negative news? So that would be my thoughts for you, and I'll turn it over to the next panelist.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bridget.
Wow, you stayed right on time. Okay, the pressure's on for me. That was good. Hi, everybody. I'm Bridget Anderson. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. We represent over 5,000 members in the Greater Vancouver region, and our membership is incredibly diverse. All sizes of business, all sectors and industries are represented. Our subsidiary is the World Trade Center Vancouver, where we help small and medium businesses develop export plans for markets. So I'm going to focus a bit on challenges and opportunities. Obviously, in Canada, we are dealing with a lot of the challenges around the trade situation. But I want to back up because, this one thing that has really been hanging over businesses more than ever, you're absolutely right, Steve, is uncertainty. And it has been happening for months. And whether or not we're going to get a deal done on August 1st or September, October, the goalposts always seem to change, is the uncertainty has already impacted businesses and consumers alike. And we're seeing it in our membership, where there's a pullback on investments, on hiring, there's changes in suppliers, there's all kinds of impacts which impact the consumer. It also has had a significant impact on our housing market. I can say I both sold my house and bought a house, and it is a terrible market right now. But that really speaks about consumer confidence. People are hanging on to their money, as well as the overhang of significant other factors that are impacting the housing market. And maybe that's a segue to the one bright spot in this trade situation is has forced us in Canada to look inward. We've had significant economic challenges in Canada and British Columbia for some time. And so we need to get our own house in order. We have to find ways to attract talent and investment, to speed up regulatory challenges, to get projects moving. At the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, we produced a report last year that benchmarked our region compared to 19 other regions globally. And I think there's a lot of similarities within the PNWER region. Certainly saw that we've got a great brand, a lot of sustainability measures, incredible talent, but we're just really not performing well when it comes to the economy. And so that speaks largely about some policies, whether they're provincial or federal in Canada. We recently launched what's called a 3% challenge for the provincial government to achieve 3% real GDP growth annually. And in order for the province to do that, and it's been done, but it's been a long time, we need to get out of our own way. We have to make it easier to do business. We have to have permitting delays dealt with. We need to attract investment. We need to be able to create jobs. You know, I'm not going to disagree with an economist necessarily, Steve, but I have a different perspective. In British Columbia, if we've had economic strength, a lot of it has been on the back of job growth in almost entirely in the public sector. There has been almost no private sector job growth in over 5 years. As well, we've had a lot of strength in our economy in Canada coming from immigration, and our federal government has recently made changes to immigration policy where for the first time in our history, we're going to have negative immigration growth, and that is going to have an impact where we see there are job shortages. So while I think that there is some truth to the strength, it really has been masked, I think, by those two very specific factors. But if I switch gears and I talk about opportunities, and I'm looking at my friend Rachel, we have had a much deeper collaboration with the Seattle Chamber and the Portland Chamber over the last year or so, and also with the Cascadia Innovation Corridor. I have been appointed to the executive committee, so helping to shape what will be the conference in the fall. Rachel and her team brought a delegation to Vancouver, a very successful delegation a few months ago, where a number of business leaders from Seattle had an opportunity to meet with policymakers and business leaders in Vancouver. And while it might have been a strange time to do that because it was at the beginning of some of this trade policy change, we all decided and knew that it was much more important to ignore that noise because the strength of the relationship was what was important. Just a few months ago, 2 months ago, I think, we joined Seattle and Portland for a fly-in in DC and had the opportunity to meet with nearly 20 Congress people and senators. And again, you know, on both sides of the aisle, the message was very clear that this is a region that has incredible strengths, and we need to lean into that despite what's happening with the Trump administration policies. And I think about what those opportunities are, and looking at Microsoft, Amazon, you know, they have been builders of what has become a really strong tech sector in our region. And so we think about that talent and the strength of the innovation sector. And we just hosted Web Summit, which is a global conference. So they call it the Olympics for the tech sector. And it was fantastic. We had nearly 18,000 people. We're hosting again next year and the following year. Please come up to Vancouver. But it's an opportunity for us as a region to showcase the strength of the innovation sector. And FIFA, of course, which we have an opportunity around economic development and to really showcase the region. And we'll talk about that maybe more because I don't want to go over time. I'm over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And it has been a fantastic partnership. All right, Mr. Metrick, over to you.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm going to step up here because I got slides and a clicker, and I'm not sure if I can handle all those at the same time. So I'm honored to be here today to join this distinguished panel. And to start, I want to talk a little bit about Port of Seattle, our view of things today, and a vision for the Port of the future. You know, I don't know if everybody knows how the Port of Seattle and Washington State ports are set up. We're special purpose governments, and we serve under commissioners that are elected at large, which is a thing which really drives us to why we have an important bottom line, which is to succeed as a business, but also to do it creating equitable economic opportunity, but also in the most sustainable way possible. And those are things that have values that have really served us well, but also are values that we all share throughout the Pacific Northwest. We're one of the most diversified ports, and I probably didn't even do that. There we go. Diversified ports in the United States, which is a good thing now these days. And our gateways are divided into 4 lines of business. On the maritime side, you can see by this map, in the yellow, we are right in the city of Seattle. We're surrounded, all of our facilities are the metropolitan area around us. And then farther to the south is Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the 11th busiest airport in the United States. We have multiple cargo, container, and bulk shipping facilities, and these are managed through the Northwest Seaport Alliance, established through a joint venture between the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma. But we also have 3 cruise berths, and we're a home port for many cruise lines in their April to October Alaska cruise season, serving about 1.4 million passengers. And they're the most demand cruises around in the nation and a growing part of our business, with 2 more cruise lines joining us in next year. And lastly, but not least, we are the largest regional real estate holders with maritime facilities and supporting uplands, serving the maritime operations and home of the North Pacific fishing fleet. We produce about 13% of the total U.S. commercial fishing catch from the waters of Washington State, Alaska. And as the largest port in the most trade-dependent state in the nation, the Port of Seattle is in fact an important part of the ports of the region's past, present, and future. In fact, our newly updated economic analysis shows that our gateways support more than 200,000 jobs and almost $50 billion in economic activity. So I think what we want to talk about collaboration, we want to know what is going right. You know, PNWER is founded on connectedness, and the reality is that some of the things we compete on those, but however, we're strong collaborators in many areas, especially on from our view, for where we sit, sustainability, tourism, and other issues. We're involved in one of the innovations that I believe that the regional collaboration demonstrates that regional collaboration is best, and that is the first ever cruise-led green corridor from Pacific Northwest to Canada in the ports in the Alaskan cruise business. So this is where we got together with civic leaders in Alaska, British Columbia, Seattle, Cruise Line International Association, the sponsor of this event, and also several NGOs and globally recognized decarbonization experts, and we're working to lead the transition of this itinerary to more sustainable fuels. In addition, we're proud to be leading on the development of sustainable fuels for the future of both aviation and other maritime industries. The ports of Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver, Fraser River, and the NWSA have committed to work together to support a clean air strategy that tracks emissions and works to achieve reductions ahead of our shared zero emission goals. The port's collaboration across borders extends to other events like the FIFA World Cup, and this collaboration includes working with local, state, and federal partners in cross-border collaboration with our British Columbia neighbors. We're thrilled to be a part of the private group of private and public sector representatives on both sides of the border, tourism leaders and business leaders, state and provincial municipal governments, law enforcement, and border management officials. And also, I just want to show this. This is one thing where we're influenced. We try to look at how we can influence policies and at different levels. And obviously from this, we can see that regional is one of our most effective areas to do that, in addition to our local impacts that we have. So I do want to talk about 1 second here in the closing time, which is just the impacts and dangers of the tariffs. You know, we've seen the ebbs and flows of tariffs on the container industry, and you're going to hear more about that from John Wolf from the NWSA in a future panel coming up tomorrow. But it is having an impact on our overall capital projects. And this, there's uncertainty. We already heard about the uncertainty already, and that is a lot of products that are coming in. That includes electrical products and other products that you may not consider or are impacted by tariffs, and that's a lot of safety products are impacted by tariffs. And it also includes lumber, steel, and aluminum, which are major parts of our capital projects. And we're also concerned on the impacts on tourism. The numbers are down for the number of Canadians, flights that are coming in overall for the nation. This doesn't mean that we're being impacted here specifically, but we know those numbers are flat, and we're looking at those. And we also want to talk about, this is just our strategy for building a port of the future. And these are the different elements we've heard a lot about here today, which is including being a zero hub for emissions, building a port that's resilient, and then working together on collaboration to have a shared success with all of our partners moving forward. And so here's just what we're focusing on is the different areas: electrification, our green corridor, and our sustainable fuels. And here is our areas that we're looking for that increased collaboration, which is our joint clean air strategies with the Port of Vancouver, Port of Tacoma, and the Port of Northwest Seaport Alliance in doing this, working on alternative fuels, on aviation fuels, and the importance of linking up in the regional transportation. We support that as well. And then, of course, with FIFA and upcoming tourism, as it continues to be a focus for us. And so with that, I'll say thank you.
Thanks so much, Steve. And Dan, we'll round things out with you.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks again to the entire team at PNWER for having me back. Again, I'm Dan Utso. I'm an international trade and transportation lawyer from Thompson Hine in beautiful Columbus, Ohio. I am a Buckeye. So to the fellow Pac-10 folks, welcome to the club. Thanks to the Ducks that helped us on our little journey to the Natty last season. We can all be friends here as long as everybody hates that so-called university in Ann Arbor, full of the cheaters. But with that, look, we have a short period of time here. I do have to give the caveats. I represent companies from all over the world that invest in North America, Canada, US in particular. I'm not here on behalf of any of our clients today, so I'm going to speak as Dan today. I am also Canada's honorary consul to Ohio. You can talk to our great friends at the Canadian Consulate in Seattle and all the elected officials here if you want to hear the Canadian government's position on things. And I also sit on a number of US government commissions and boards. We'll see how much longer those are around on these various advisory committees. I'm just speaking as myself today. I also am one of the person everybody loves to hate because I work with Republicans and Democrats on campaigns. I'm a political guy in Ohio and throughout the battleground states, and was where I spend my time. I'm more on the money side of things and some of the strategy, kitchen cabinet type stuff. But on behalf of my clients, I have to do both. And so I don't pick a team, but that doesn't always make you the most popular guy in the room. But as I talk today, my job isn't to endorse a particular policy. My job is to understand what the administration is trying to do so that we can react as the private sector. And with all of those caveats aside, I'll just say a few things. One is, what are our companies asking? Our companies want to know right now, what is the end game? That's the most common question. Number two, can we just wait this out? And number three, because the midterms are coming and then we'll have another election here. God, it seems like we just got out of that one. And then thirdly, what's the impact? And that's what we'll be talking about a lot during the Q&A. When we meet with the administration, we're very close because let's not forget, MAGA kind of started in Ohio. And so a lot of our folks, not the least of which is the vice president, is obviously from Ohio. So we spend a lot of time talking to the administration and on the philosophy. And what they'll always say to me in meetings is, look, number one is you're only looking at the tariff side of things. There's a much broader plan here in what we're doing on the investment attraction side, on the energy side, on the permitting side, et cetera. And I think that's a part of the narrative that often gets lost, is the broader plan and how all of these pieces stitch together. But let me just take the trade piece for a moment. And we're going to have a panel later today on trade and tariffs and all of those things. But all of the issues on tariffs actually are exactly what we just saw in the last panel. That was a masterful panel. Many of us know AI is coming. I grew up working in a steel mill, and now I'm a trade lawyer. I have no tangible skills at this stage. If a meteor comes, an asteroid comes to hit the Earth, you don't take the trade lawyer into the cave, right? I'm not going in. And that's what AI is going to wipe out. Like, I grew up in a community that was a steel town that's been wiped out, largely by trade, and is part of all of the movement that we're seeing. And so I live and breathe that, much like Ambassador Hoekstra said, he drives by those facilities. That's where my folks live. That's where my family's from. That's where my friends from. And I've been talking about that now for 20 years in communities like this. And that's part of the politics underlying all of these stories. But the next wave ain't hitting the manufacturing workers. That's already been decimated. It's hitting us. And so all those manufacturing workers that worked hard in the last generation to put their kids from schools to be lawyers, accountants, et cetera, they ain't going to have those jobs. That's the reality of the situation. And every law firm, we're trying to figure out what Microsoft asked and those types of questions is, how do you get somebody with experience? I'm kind of happy I'm almost 50 but I don't know, man, if we're going to make it through all of this in terms of the timelines. But the slide that we saw at the outset, and I'm mindful of the time here, but if I can just maybe have a leave for a minute or two more, is that when you saw the 10 companies before, it was the D3, the oil companies, the energy companies, et cetera, and then look at the next slide, and you saw who those companies are. How many of those companies are manufacturing in the United States? Right? So the president's trade agenda there's 3 R's. It's the rebalancing trade agenda that started in Trump 1.0. President Biden continued it, and it's now rebalancing from China. Starts with steel and aluminum, it's autos, and then now copper, semiconductors, pharma, and we're adding drones and a number of other things down the list. Those tariffs are under national security, and when those tariffs go on, they will be on forever. Those are the Section 232s. And that's where a lot of the dispute is happening. But when you say BYD electric vehicles are the cheapest electric vehicles in the world at $18,000, why are they cheap? Because China has subsidized the entire production of that, from the extraction of the lithium ion to the processing to the manufacturing itself. By the way, where did China get the technology? From the original IP from the US auto companies that invested there. And so now they're selling that to the world. If BYD hits US or Canadian shores, there won't be a North American auto industry. It's an invasive species. And that's why the US said no. That's why the Biden administration said no electric vehicles, 100% tariffs. Canada came on board, and yes, Western Canada got hit by that canola growers, but it wasn't just because the US asked you. There wouldn't be a Canadian auto industry if BYD hits these shores. And it's not because it's a superior vehicle or there's competitive advantages that China has. It's because it's subsidized and dumped into the market, right? There's no labor and environmental rules that attack that process. Like, it's the same thing with solar. There are no solar cell manufacturers in the US up until a year ago. All of our solar panels are coming from where? China. Ask Jones Lang LaSalle and CBRE. Number of the warehouses in the United States right now are full of solar panels. Some of that is lack of demand because of the changes that you saw in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's also because we had to give a 2-year window to get the solar panels in here to meet the Biden administration's demand. Those warehouses are full of Chinese, but they're Canadian or Cambodian, Malaysian, and Thai solar panels before draconian tariffs kick on those as well. So those are going to be the first things that our utilities are hooking up to their grids. Right? So that's the answer. So we're rebalancing trade. We're cutting deals with countries right now and we've seen the first 3. Great Britain kind of, let's be blunt, they screwed everybody. They locked in 10% tariffs, right? They locked in 10%. Vietnam allegedly has agreed to 20% tariffs. Indonesia just agreed to 19. We were saying earlier, why is the number for 19% tariffs on Indonesia? Because they wanted to be less than Vietnam, and Vietnam was 20. So there's not a lot of math behind these numbers, by the way. It's just, but also what the president's doing is getting removal of non-tariff barriers by these countries. He's getting purchases, not the least of which is a lot of Boeing airplanes are being bought. That's not going to be too bad for the Pacific Northwest. And then doing things on NATO and other types of things. People don't like the tactics, but it's certainly not taco. It's not Trump always chickens out. It's that Trump asked for concessions only. And Trump approves concessions only. And so that's what we're beating other countries up to get it. The third R is the major problem. That's what's holding up the Canada-US deal, Japan, Korea, the European Union, and elsewhere, is the president has a revenue driver. So it's rebalancing reciprocal trade. It's not really reciprocal. We're not giving up anything. We're just beating out concessions. But the third is the revenue driver. We're taking in records amount of tariff revenue, and the president likes that. But other countries are saying, look, we'll agree, Canada and those countries are saying, we'll agree with your rebalancing agenda. We'll agree to put tariffs on steel and aluminum, automotive, et cetera. We'll agree to that. We'll actually agree to some of these reductions in tariff levels and non-tariff barriers and NATO funding and all that. But what we're not going to do is agree that once we have a quota for steel and aluminum, is to then give you 10% on top of that for your revenue. We're not going to do that. And that's a bridge too far. And that's what's holding up these deals. And I'll just end in saying the real question over the next 4 to 6 weeks going into April 1st is, will Canada, Mexico, the European Union, Japan, and Korea hold together? Because right now they're locking arms and saying, we're not agreeing to that deal. We're not going to do all these things you're asking us to do, because those countries are making a number of concessions to the United States right now. Make no mistake about it. But we're not going to give you 10% on top of that, or 25% is what some of the asks are right now. But if they all hold and the Trump president blows by that deal, do they then retaliate? And then we have a big mess in August and September. Or does somebody crack first? And I have the smart money on who's going to crack first. It's either going to be Mexico or Korea. One of those two is going to crack before August 1st. And then the rest will have to decide what they do. Because the other thing is, nobody wants to cut that deal. I'm sorry, I'll just wrap up here. But nobody wants to be the first mover on that deal to say, we'll lock in 10% tariffs. And then the next group comes in and says, we get 8 7, right? So right now there's a game of chicken going on, both within those countries that I just mentioned and with the administration itself. My fear with President Trump, again, I'm not endorsing these policies. I'm just telling you what we're seeing happening. But the game of chicken is with President Trump is he'll let the chickens kill each other, sell the nuggets and the feathers for pillows. I mean, that's just how he rolls, right? So I think countries that aren't willing to make deals right now need to be very mindful that this could get bumpy, very bumpy in August if we don't get there. So it's not the most optimistic thing, but on the flip side, if we do cut deals, the US economy is sitting in a pretty good shape. One, we've addressed some of those strategic concerns on rebalancing. On the reciprocal side, there will be opportunities. I mentioned Boeing, agricultural, the Vietnam deal. We've had 6 US states go over and meet with the Vietnamese agricultural ministers where they've agreed to purchase soy and a number of other products as well, right? That all isn't getting published and all of those kinds of things, but there are concessions after concessions being made. The question is at what cost? It's great if those countries around the world lower their tariff barriers and US consumers. Are we really going to sell a ton of SUVs to Vietnam? Anybody ever driven on a road in Vietnam? It ain't fit in my Yukon or Sierra. It's just not going to go. But also, will these tactics cause those countries to say we're not buying US goods? And we've already seen that cost in Canada and elsewhere as well. So we don't want to admit this. It's working. The strategy's actually working. If you agree with the strategy, the question is what's the cost to it? And that's maybe the discussion for the next 41 minutes and 14 seconds. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. And we embrace the political around here, so we appreciate that. And that might be job certainty for some of us as well. And appreciate you bringing the candor that you also brought on our prep call. So jumping into some of the questions, and I'm going to sort of direct these at one of you, but then I want to encourage the rest of you to please jump in if there's something you want to add. So first for you, Steve, and I'm going to flip my question to embrace your positivity because I appreciate that. So, we are seeing that recent trade shifts are testing the economic resilience of PNWER here. So what does that look like going forward? How does economic resilience look for the PNWER region today in the face of those challenges?
Sorry, I forgot how to turn my mic on. I think the resiliency still is what's made the strength of PNWER is the cooperation, the collaboration, and the coordination. I think we still have diversity within that sector when you consider that, we go from having, lumber, that type of thing in the British Columbia area. You have oil from Canada. You have semiconductors from Idaho and Oregon, and you have aerospace from Washington. We're not exposed to just one specific area. There's enough diversity there. But I think the resiliency is the ability to adapt with that and then think outside the box of not being stuck in the old ways. And somebody had talked about this as saying you've got to think of new ways and a new approach to doing that. But I think that is where that coordination with everybody can make the PNWER region still be able to respond to those type of challenges.
Great. Anybody want to add anything related to economic resilience here in the PNWER region?
I think there's a real opportunity for us to collaborate even more than we do. And I know that that we have some significant challenges around the border, but we think about, the movement of people, for example, in the innovation sector. We have got an incredible talent pool, which we should be leveraging more through and being able to move these people around. And Microsoft is going to call them out there because they are doing a good job of that. But I think we could really shape the region as an innovation hub in ways that we are starting to do. But I think there's more that we could be doing there that would make us more resilient. Maybe the elephant in the room is the border and how we get people across the border. And that we're not just talking about the movement of people, high-speed rail, but we're talking about just the ease of moving people and getting them across, when it comes to work visas and things like that. So, that is going to be a significant challenge that has to be addressed in order for that environment to really thrive.
Rachel, if I can add, the reason I was mentioning sustainable energy for both the maritime and the aviation industry, these are global industries. And for us to remain competitive, the rest of the world is moving. There's some votes that are happening at the international level on maritime fuels And so, and I know the administration has come out opposed to those, but if those pass at the International Maritime Organization, they're going to be shifting towards these more sustainable fuels. So I think the collaboration, cross-border collaboration in the region is important for us to remain competitive. And of course, aviation is a global industry as well. So for us, you know, I was down in Texas earlier this year. They are all on board. It's all the above energy, and they're going for that, and they're figuring out how to get their energy to Texas. You know, where they're not trying, to California, where they're not trying to figure out how to get it to is the Pacific Northwest. And so we have to be undertaking that, because a lot of our international trade, both aviation and maritime, it will have to be on board with that. And I think our collaboration can help us build a resilience.
Great. Thank you. Well, Steve, sticking with you, maybe to get us started on this next question, Steve Metrick, sorry.
You need more Steves on all these panels.
No, we've got a good number of them. We like it. So, you know, you see trade trends and tariff developments on the ground. So what are you seeing in terms of what regional leaders should be watching closely right now in terms of trade trends and tariff developments?
Well, I think some of the things, and then Steve was talking about as well, you know, we saw earlier on, and of course, these are, they'll be talking on more specifically in the panel tomorrow about it. But what we saw in general were orders were placed way ahead. So we saw a large increase in containers and cargo coming in to beat the tariffs. And then once the tariffs came out in place before they were backed off, there were some business owners, especially small businesses, were impacted because they went, for one example, there was a fleece that was sold for already produced in China, but sold in the US at $90. But then with the tariffs, it was $160. So the importer had to eat those tariffs and figure out how to do that. And the list goes on and on. Products imported from Italy and products imported sustainable, even like wooden spoons. It was Molly Moon's impact said that their spoons were going to cost them $250,000 more if those tariffs had stayed in place. So it's that uncertainty that you're seeing on small businesses effectively as it goes forward. So I think that's the thing. And then now we're in a stage now we're in a wait and see. But just like Steve said, people, you know, once they cleared out those products that were over in China and other places, now they're waiting to see what the orders and the certainty before they place more orders. And that'll have an impact as we go forward.
Steve, do you want to add something to that?
No, the only thing that I would say, a lot of the customers that we work with for the bank is, you know, the construction industry. So the softwood lumber dispute that still hasn't been resolved, I think they keep saying we need to get resolutions, because the same thing, how do we plan when we don't know for sure what type of tariffs, that type of thing is? So I would just say that would be one other area that we're seeing real life from our construction work industries.
And Dan, I saw you nodding over there.
Yeah, that's when we deal with just nonstop. We have one of the largest construction practices in the country, and that's who I spend my day with. So on mega projects, a lot of the very projects that we're trying to build, stadiums, et cetera. And right now we just can't price, right? We just don't know what the cost of steel and aluminum, everything on that steel. So when we did steel and aluminum, we had tariffs in the Trump 1.0, the Biden administration continued them. But we basically set up a quota system. So basically the steel that was in the quota was good, bring it in. And it wasn't a punitive quota. It was set at 2017 levels with some room to grow on. And then anything above that was hit with tariffs. Well, now we're going to end up with a quota where probably the president wants to get 10% within, but we added a bunch of derivative downstream products to that. And the downstream products are basically everything used on a construction site. So from the steel beams themselves to the aluminum ladders, like barbed wires on the list, the screws, the nuts, the washers. So we get into, in my trade nerd world every day, we get into, are you using nails with steel heads or copper heads or those kind of things? It can get that crazy. But right now we can't price. We can't price a project. So all of those projects are on hold unless they're on timelines already. And then you get into the legal side of it. Do we use a contingency for other costs? And so we've developed some tricks of the trade to try to keep these projects moving. But I think it gets to all of the Steve's points that we've heard from today, is that I don't think we can believe any of the numbers that we're seeing right now. I'm just going to be frank. The reality is, if I've done my job, we've tried to hide the cost of tariffs as much as we can, or mitigate. I'm being a little flip right now. Like, we've mitigated the tariffs. No, we hit it, right? Because not all of the tariffs get passed on to the consumer. They get split. We renegotiate. Businesses do things on the fly. A lot of activity on bonded warehouses, foreign trade zones, et cetera. And we've burned through most of that inventory we brought over. When I was talking to clients this time last year through last fall, it was get as much as you can over here as fast as you can. Like, we knew this was coming. And what amazed me is when we would talk to companies last fall, they all kind of understood that, but I don't think they understood the scope, because they're like, yeah, we had been through Trump 1.0, we'd been through COVID. We're like, no, this is gonna be much bigger, right? When we would go to Wall Street and Bay Street, it was like, no, those are just threats. The president's not gonna do that. And so then, and we're like, well, you guys haven't been paying attention. Like, we were down in Mar-a-Lago, and the first thing he asked me was like, what do you think of my reciprocal tariff plan? And this was a year before the election, right? So, so we knew these things were coming, but then the street overreacted in the spring. And right now there's just a view that taco is going to be it. Look, we're going to see a hit in the economy, because I don't know if it's inflationary. I'll leave that to the real smart people in the room, but prices are going to go up. Prices have to go up, right? I mean, like, we're going to pass on price costs, because the reality, the dirty little secret, kind of dovetailing off what I said at the beginning, is we haven't had an inflationary environment because we've been living off cheap subsidized Chinese goods for the last 15, 20 years. Now we're going to actually start paying which things cost, and probably a little bit more, right? And so that there's going to be pressures on that. And that's where to close out, is that's where the other part of the Trump administration strategy, which doesn't get talked about, the America First investment strategy. So what they're doing is streamlining permits for projects over $1 billion, speedlining review for foreign investment attraction, permitting, cutting red tape. Just Friday, an executive order came out reducing environmental rules for 2 companies, U.S. Steel and Cleveland-Cliffs, that are doing iron ore for the steel industry. Like, the thing is, this time they're much more well organized than they were last time. But the goal is if the economic driver, that's the only way this is going to work, because the idea is, yes, we know we're putting extra costs in the system, but we're also going to spur the economy. And we're going to use, and it was the Biden administration had the same strategy, was a tariff wall on certain products, but instead of trusting private investment to come in and do these things and cut red tape, cut environmental rules, which was not exactly the Biden administration was used the Inflation Reduction Act, chipped in the Infrastructure Act to spur the economy, which was, basically saying, we're going to do exactly what China's doing, right? That's what we were doing in those sectors, is subsidizing the hell out of them, right? And the question is, I'm not here to say which one's right or wrong. I'm just saying how narrow of a strike zone this is for this to work, right? Like, both of those strategies have to land perfectly for it. And that's before we even get to, like, when I'm burning the midnight oil, I'm sleeping like an hour a day, which you can kind of tell the way I ramble. But my immigration team is in the office with me burning. But who I've started to see a lot of is our bankruptcy teams in the office, because what we're seeing is small and middle market firms are getting squeezed out. Right. And so then we're going to have to deal with antitrust and things like that when we have competition rules and those kind of things. So all of this has to land perfectly, or it's going to be a mess.
And Bridget, please.
As the lone Canadian on the panel, I think I have to talk about softwood lumber. And it is a significant concern. We are looking at duties more than doubling, and it's a sector that has been in trouble for a long time. It has been under pressure for a long time. So if those tariffs go into place, those duties go into place, I'm worried about the decimation of the forest sector in British Columbia. And when we think about how that's impacting consumers, we're definitely talking directly about affordability challenges in the housing market, which is a huge challenge in this region. We are already seeing significant challenges on the housing market, whether it's the slowing dollars from developers hanging onto their money and not building more housing, which we desperately need, or the cost of housing going up significantly because of the cost of lumber, the cost of other construction materials. And that is going to be something that is, I think, going to become one of the biggest issues for this region, because it impacts the ability for employers to attract and retain talent. It means that we cannot have these people, we can't house these people, which will have significant challenges around social issues and homelessness and mental health and addiction. And it's something that all levels of government are desperately trying to address. And certainly in British Columbia, I will give kudos to the BC government and the federal government in Canada that they have taken a lot of measures to address this, but it's almost a little, too late. And because of the other factors involved, I'm not sure where this is going to end up, Rachel. And that is a huge concern that we should all be paying much more attention to.
Appreciate that, Bridget. And let's stick with you for just a minute. So you just talked about one industry specifically, but generally, how do you feel like businesses in the region are adapting to all this uncertainty? What are they trying to do to adapt? And what role can organizations like ours play in building on that response or that economic stability that we're seeking?
I'm not sure they are adapting. I think the uncertainty is just having many businesses, particularly small and medium businesses, stay in a holding pattern. I think you just mentioned whether, it's shipments. I know of several businesses that have had cargo shipments just sitting out there. They're not sure what to do with them because they can't pass on a couple of $100,000 extra to their consumers. So they either send it back and cancel the order, or they absorb the cost. And then they're looking at layoffs, and they're looking at then trying to change suppliers, which is very difficult when some of those products cannot be replaced. So the uncertainty is taking a toll for sure. What I'm concerned about in British Columbia is that some businesses are looking at their best options, which could be relocating outside of British Columbia to another jurisdiction. And then that will have a significant impact, obviously, on our economy. The things that we can control, and I think that's one of the, maybe to put a positive spin on it, Steve, is because so much of this we can't control. What we can control right now, Canadian premiers are meeting today in Ontario. They're meeting tomorrow with the Prime Minister. There are things that we can do and need to be doing in Canada to get our own house in order. And that is around permitting. It is around foreign investment. It is around creating jobs. It's cleaning up some of the layers of cost of doing business that have become out of control in Canada. How many people have read the book Abundance? I swear probably, yep, I knew it. I knew lots of you had. It is written from an American perspective, but it applies in Canada. We have made it so costly to do business and so difficult to get things done by layering on, in some cases, good safety measures or environmental measures, but so much of it is duplicative that it is making it very difficult. And that's, how do you peel back the layers of that? And so your question about what do organizations like us do, we're advocates, and we say things that maybe small and medium businesses can't say because they can't take that risk. We also are collaborative, working with different levels of government and bringing those issues to the forefront, where we really try to change public policy for the good, to get the economy going. And then we're there to hear from our members. But it is an incredibly difficult time, and the uncertainty, regardless of where the policy changes are going to land, the uncertainty is going to take a long time to work its way out of the system.
Great. Steve S., I'll start this next question with you, for you. How are interest rate trends, inflation pressures, and global monetary policy shifts affecting trade flows, and then importantly, investment decisions in the PNWER region? And Dan, I suspect you'll have something to say about this too.
Well, I think the reality is the Federal Reserve has been very clear that they are not intending to lower rates anywhere in the near future because they're still trying to decide, are we going to have stagflation, where you've got a slowing economy and rising prices? So the bottom line is, even though, because we had 10 years of subsidized low rates and businesses got used to that, we have businesses that aren't built for these high rate environments. And so, we're seeing, as debt comes due, we're having issues there with businesses, but more importantly, new projects aren't going forward because of the cost of financing, those types of things. So, the feedback I've given my board over and over again is, I think that unless we really start to see the economy, as we were talking about there, if you don't hit a home run on all those things and the economy actually starts to suffer damage there, then we'll start to see interest rates come down. But I think otherwise, as we planned as a bank, as a lending institution, I've essentially told them that, yes, I think we'll probably see some additional lowering of short-term rates, but long-term rates are being driven by the capital markets. Not, the Federal Reserve doesn't control those. And the message that I say is being delivered by the capital markets, because one, I don't think they've fully built in what the real tariffs are. But the bottom line is, the long-term investors are saying, look, inflation is not under control, even though pundits may say it is. So I need a higher premium to invest long term. Two, you just keep issuing more and more debt, and I'm worried about who's the buyer of that debt going to be. And if it's me, I got to be compensated. So I need a higher yield for that. And the third risk we haven't seen yet, but is a real risk, is if foreign countries, if we achieve our goal of saying that we want to reduce the trade deficit with the other countries, well, the math of that says the reason foreign investors own a third of our debt is because they have trade surpluses with us and they hold US dollars and they want to park that in a safe place. So if we shrink the deficit, they have less dollars they're holding, which means they will have less treasuries that they're going to be buying because they don't need that. Who's that new buyer? That's where I just think that we probably should get adjusted to saying a 10-year treasury somewhere between 3.5% to 5% is the new level. We're currently at about a 4.45. And if something goes sideways with the deficit overall, then you could potentially see, longer term rates higher while short-term rates are lower. So I think that's a challenge for long-term planning and long-term progress, because we've got to kind of cycle through the businesses that needed the 3% rates and are now looking at 5 or 6% rates, wash them out essentially, and have the new players who are then ready and able to do business there. And I would definitely say, from our perspective, we have lots of our investors who have cash on the sidelines because they're earning almost 4% there, so they're not getting hurt, saying, this is a game of chicken and you're going to blink before I'm going to blink. So I'm waiting for those buildings to come on the market at 90% discounts, other things. But as you go through that process, you cleanse, which we prevented for 10 years. We prevented the cleansing process. Then we'll be at a position where businesses make sense at those levels. But I think it'll be a slow and painful process to convert to that process.
Any other panelists want to add to that?
Yeah, I do think I thought that was masterful in the sense that what's happening, we get caught up, dummies like me, we get caught up on the tariff rates and the non-tariff barriers and those things. But what Secretary Besson is doing with each of the countries, particularly in the Asia Pacific region, is also issues around currency manipulation. We've seen some really kind of unique things going on in the foreign exchange markets and with Asian currencies, Malaysia, Thailand, et cetera. And so what we're seeing is they're actually, in order to get a deal, those countries are going to have to start letting their currencies float a little bit more. So we're addressing some long-term structural problems, but we're also playing a very narrow strike zone game with the dollar, because we want the dollar's devaluing, arguably, right? Which should make it harder for U.S. consumers to buy exports, but better for U.S. companies to manufacture and export out. But at which point, and that's why you see the president go bananas whenever he hears anything about the BRICS countries and their own currency, because the only way that this devaluation kind of works is if the dollar is still the coin of the realm, right? And people still want to buy all the things that Steve just said, our treasuries and our debt. And so we're, I know we have friends from the Fed here today. I wouldn't want to be at the Fed right now. These are tough calls to make, and it's I wouldn't want to be the Fed for a lot of reasons politically right now. But
careful. Looking at our friends out here.
Yeah, right. But I'm just at that point, it's I think this is there's so many pieces of the puzzle out here right now that it's tough to just answer it, because if you pull a string over here, it's pulling a thread over here, and then either you're going to weave a beautiful tapestry or we're going to unravel the whole damn thing. And I'm frequently asked, what's my biggest fear? My biggest fear is both the Biden administration and the Trump administration have made big bets. These are chips all in type gambles that we're making. And let's say we have to back off the trade policy what is the signal to the rest of the world? It's open season on the US at that point. And that's why in April, when the first taco happened, after Liberation Day tariffs happened, and we went kind of all in on China, and there was a coordinated, arguably, release of treasuries by China, Korea, Japan, and the markets themselves reacted. Was most people thought that the White House, and I was in there that day, that they were backing off, and it was the exact opposite. It was, this proves our point. The fact that we are holding the types of debt that you heard about from the ambassador this morning, that we have that kind of debt. And the fact, because this is a situation we've controlled. We're controlling the stick on the tariff policy right now. And we have to back off a little bit because of the Treasury dump, right? What happens when it's a situation we can't control? Taiwan, for example, or something else happening in the global economy. So this actually kind of proved the point that it's kind of now or never. And that's the framework. Again, not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying that's the view that they view this as a once in a lifetime, or we have lost the US economy. And if you understand that, then you don't go in and asking for exclusions for China sourced goods, right? If I want to get an exclusion for something, and we were intimately involved in the 10% on energy, and we have our great friends here from the fertilizer industry on potash, et cetera, what you have to do, and the only exclusions that will ever be granted, I'm telling you this right now, will be if you come in and say, we need that product, but we're also investing this within 2x, within 2 years. Like, it's not going to be, we just can't get it here in the United States. It's going to be, we can't get it here, but we're pumping $100 million, $200 million on the table, and so that we can have it here in 2 years, and then we need a little bit of a runway to get it there. And that's why you've seen what's the strategy we're all doing, and now the media's picked up on it. We're announcing projects that we already announced about a year ago, right? Like, every company, we're like, yeah, we're making that investment, but we're just re-announcing it again and putting it under this banner, because that's the way you get in the door with the administration right now.
And I think, do we want to move to some of the audience questions here? If you guys want to scroll to one, I think up at the top. Keep going. Great. How about, we're going to come back to Steve here for just a second. For our economists, I'll read the question out loud. The revenue piece and the burden of the tariff negotiations is incurred by U.S. consumers, not on foreign nations. You discuss consumers as the key to our economic success. What happens to the revenue, and isn't the U.S. administration shooting us all in the foot?
Well, I think we're all clear now after
That was a very popular
especially
question.
the 6 months, that revenues are a tax. And, that's plain and simple is what they are. And businesses, if they know what the tax is and they can rely on it, they'll adjust and go from there. So yes, the consumer is bearing the burden, because I think especially the problem is for small businesses, they do not have the reserves of an Amazon or a Walmart or a Target. You say, we're going to eat that. They are, especially for the low margin type of small businesses, they're going to be forced to pass that along. And then we see that impact to the consumer. So it's this zero-sum game, is that we've brought in, I think it's over $100 billion in revenue from tariffs so far. That means either U.S. businesses or consumers have paid $100 billion plus out of their pockets. So who's the more efficient user of that money? Is it more efficient to have the government get the revenue and do things with it, or leave it at the consumer? Right now, it's just every president has their own choice. President Biden thought that the best way to raise revenue is tax corporations, tax high net worth individuals. Well, President Trump feels more that tariffs are a better revenue source, and is doing other things as well. But yes, ultimately, if businesses pass through those costs to the consumer, partially or fully, that is going to impact the consumer and their ability to spend, because every dollar spent on taxes is a dollar not available to spend on other things.
I'm going to take another question here and direct this towards Bridget and Steve Metruk. I want to move to infrastructure for a minute and maybe hear you both talk a little bit about what infrastructure investments you think are important, and how we can better align on some of those infrastructure investments between our two countries.
I think from the perspective of British Columbia, we have Canada's largest port. It is also the fourth largest port in North America. And there's a real opportunity for more collaboration within the region, whether that is making sure that the rail crossings are better, there's more port collaboration, there's more border collaboration. We are the Pacific, the gateway to the Asia Pacific. And when we think about those goods that we're trying, LNG, for example, to get over to Asia, we can do so from the Pacific Northwest much, much faster than anywhere else. And so there's a real opportunity there. But, one of the challenges at the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority has been, we went through a very significant labor disruption, which many of you are probably aware of. That cost, the value of goods that were impacted was $10 billion. My colleague there, David, was smart enough to put together a port calculator, which had the ticker going all the time, which kept us all up to date about how the value of goods was being impacted. One of the reasons for the disruption, the labor disruption, had to do with automation. We just had the last session talking talking about AI, that is a real opportunity for improvement when it comes to port operations, probably across the globe. You would know better than me, and I'll pass it off to you. But that automation has to be put in place, and we have to find better and more efficient ways to get these goods through our ports. But infrastructure, more investment in the rail crossings, the border, and also port operations.
I think to comment on that, for us, it's efficiency. That was one of my things for a port of the future. Has to be efficient effective in the way that it operates the gateway. We don't know if it's all in automation. That's a very it's a very touchy issue here in Washington State. So it's but I think the efficiency part of it is a big part of that to make us the most efficient possible. And I think if I can bring in one of the things, not that I really want to bring it up, but one of the questions here was on the Chinese vessels coming in. And this, talked about each Chinese vessel as it came in would have $1 million for each port call as it came into the U.S. And the question is, well, does this blow up traffic via the ports, in Vancouver and Prince Rupert? I think the administration is not looking at doing that. They would do something else. Like if the cargo was going to come in and a Chinese ship wasn't going to go to Seattle or Tacoma, but instead was going to be directed because they didn't want to pay the $1 million, I believe the administration would not want to do that. They would put something in place that would stop that from happening. So I think that's something that's one of those things of where the unintended it may see it like it may be that, but I don't think the administration is going to look at cargo diversion to the ports in Canada as a solution to what's problem it was trying to get, which is to rebuild the U.S. Maritime industry. So that's one thing on the trade. So, but I think if I could just add one thing on the infrastructure too, which I think is really important, and we kind of hit it. Dan was talking about construction and capital projects, and I mentioned it, but it's the crossing of the AI, the demand for power in the region across Cascadia is going to be a major defining thing, and these tariffs or the supply chains are critical for that. And we know in Seattle that Seattle City Light is going to need 4 times the energy they have today in the near future in order to meet the demands for AI and other things growing. And the big thing is that we're limited on electrical equipment coming in right now. It's produced, and there's actually a worldwide demand for that. We need to electrify in order to decarbonize, but also to meet the AI demand. And those two things come together, and not having the power that we're going to need for that is one thing. But even getting the lines, we laid a marine cable, and we had to delay the project for a year because it took us a year to get the cable of the backlog for that. And the transformers and the other things, we just don't have that equipment here. And I don't know where it's heading, because it's a major problem for us as a region to meet those demands as we go forward.
Anybody else on infrastructure? Might switch gears here again. So Dan, I want to come back to you. What should PNWER policymakers and business leaders be doing today? We heard from Bridget saying, that she actually doesn't think that a lot of businesses are evolving or adjusting right now. Are there things they should or could be doing that they're not doing today?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Against the trade volatility, essentially.
Well, I think companies are now waking up. I think there was some denial, and certainly, like I said, in the markets, and we're still going to see that play out. And the window is very narrow. I think if we don't get this done in the next month, we're going to see real problems in the economy, because all of those safety measures that I was talking about, they're just not in place. And the ramp up, the economic boom side of it is not ready to go yet. So and that's where, Steve just hit it as well. On the construction side, if you want to build AI data centers, et cetera, and I live in Columbus, Ohio, right? We're the 3rd or 4th right now for data centers. And the new semiconductor Intel is down the street from my house, about 10, because we don't have hurricanes, we don't have earthquakes, et cetera. And so it's big, but we can't get these projects moving because we don't have the stuff. The other part is most of these places can't find plumbers and electricians right now. So, that's the real issue that we're dealing with, which is, the local, state issue and provincial issues are workforce development, education, et cetera. Kids should be going to, I have a 14-year-old. I'm like, should he really be going to college? I don't know, or trade school. You really have to start thinking about these things. But I actually just, on a very positive note for PNWER, and thinking about the future of Canada, US, and maybe the continent as well, I think we're going to see a shift from the dynamics of the relationship. And I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I already said it on CBC the other night, so what the hell? I think it's going to move from kind of the Ontario, Western or Eastern Canada to this being the locus of the Canada-US relationship. When you think about energy, AI development, all of those types, not taking anything away from those provinces, but it's not going to be the automotive sector. I'm an auto guy. I'm from Ohio. Like I said, I grew up in a steel mill. That's not the future, right? I mean, it's a piece of the puzzle, but here is where all the opportunities are. And I think, and we can only do it together. There's just no question. Canada and the United States can only do this together, but we need to align on our policies. And the 51st state thing didn't help. The reaction to the 51st state thing didn't help as well. And so we just need to move past that and let's get to work on some of these concrete, tangible projects as well. If we're talking policy and politics, we're losing in Canada, US. We need to talk about projects and people. That's the name of the game. And if we can do that, that's when we're actually winning in the Canada-US relationship vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And this is the region where it's going to happen, in my view.
That's great. And Bridget, we got this. We could do that. We could be the center. We'll take it. So you go ahead and add to that.
No, one thing I just want to throw in quick is Dan's talking about the struggle of even if you want to build the centers, you don't have the labor to do that. And that's where I would say once again is that if you focus on the opportunities, I mean, this is where I would see, instead of worrying about we're going to take jobs away, we're going to fill jobs we can't fill with what we call physical AI. You marry robotics with generative AI, and you've got robots then that can be able to build the houses and things like that or fill those gaps. And I think that, again, you got the PNWER region is where, because if you look at, you have to build those robotics, you have to build those types of things. And where that is happening, as Dana said, it's not in the Midwest, it's along the West Coast. That's where these new factories are popping up. They're heavily automated, but they still have people working as well. And I think that's where the PNWER region is well positioned to take advantage of that type of developments where the physical AI is going to be your partner. It's not going to be the job stealer, even though we'll still lose jobs to other areas.
Just briefly, when it comes to all these AI data centers, the amount of power that it takes to run these. So yes, it's the electricians, but it's the electricity to be able to run these big facilities. And, we have an abundance of water in this region, but we actually have to start moving on this because the demand for the electricity is going to be enormous to run these data centers. So it's not just the workforce, it's actually the infrastructure that is required underneath that.
And we're putting them behind the meter now, right, on that point. Mm-hmm. So all of the energy source for that's behind the meter, basically off the utility grid, right, and specific to that company. Legislators, regulators are going to have to figure out how do you, A, address that, but B, we're eventually going to have to bring that back on the grid at some point. And so these, this is the issue, I think, for state and provincial legislators and local officials as well, is how do we deal with this energy demand? And there's no, I don't think there's a silver bullet myself. It's going to take collaboration and thinking in new ways.
I think it's really going to take, we talked about the whole permitting process. If you haven't heard the phrase, you better start learning the phrase small modular nuclear. This is the new trend for nuclear, and stop thinking 3 Mile Island. That is not the nuclear we're talking about. The tech companies that understand that. Amazon has purchased property on the Hanford Reservation to prepare for that type of thing. I think Meta bought 3 Mile Island to be able to have a spot to do that. So I think this is how ultimately we're going to address that energy need, but it's more to Steve's point. Okay, I can produce it. How do I get it to you? Because you still got to have the infrastructure to deliver it.
All right, so I think I'm going to ask last question on a positive note to all four of you, being mindful of the time, so we'll keep it kind of short. But question is around FIFA World Cup. So we're going to have a whole bunch of people coming here. They're going to come through our ports. They're going to generate a lot of money. They're going to cross the border. Give us kind of one parting thought on your thoughts on FIFA World Cup coming here, and given the discussion that we've had today.
I think it's a huge opportunity. These are people that maybe never would have visited this area before. And I would just, I guess my dream, and I recognize this as a dream, I would wish that TSA and whatever the equivalent is for Canada would open a specific lane for FIFA World Cup people, and you show your ticket, you can be transported through far quicker than the normal process that way. But I think there's huge opportunities, and I'm going to be the optimist to say we'll actually have light rail going from Seattle to Redmond by then, so that they can visit our wineries and everything else as well. But I think this is a great opportunity, and I think the chambers are all over it.
I maybe would take a page from the 2010 Olympics. I worked for the Premier of the province during the Olympics. The eyes of the world were on us, and this is going to be 100 times that. And so it is a real opportunity for the region to show off. And so, yes, it is the movement of people to be able to get around the region, but also what is our unique value proposition? And so I think about it from the economic development lens. You know, what are we doing? And Rachel and I talk about it a lot, but understanding which games are going to be held in Seattle and in Vancouver, and then understanding which high-level CEOs from around the world are coming here, and then let's show them what we've got, and let's attract more investment into this whole region, not just as, you know, a Vancouver or a Seattle approach.
I don't know if anyone's noticed, but there's some projects going on at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. I don't know if anybody has, but we're driving to complete those projects by 2026.
And we're excited about that.
So we want to have those projects completed. We'll be on hold on other major projects. So that's one thing of that gateway, but we want to be welcoming. And I think the big thing for us is exactly to build upon what we said here, which is we want to promote tourism for the whole region, so that you may see that, and then they come back. And we call it, you know, one of our commissioners has coined the phrase, the three nation vacation, which is the U.S., Canada, and the tribal nations to do that. And that's something we want to do that. And there's a chance to put our foot forward. We're all in that and supporting that, and operating our gateway as efficiently as possible, and participate in all those other discussions as well on increasing tourism away from the primary things that are there. Because I think, I saw some questions about, you know, smaller cities, but that's what we want to do. We want to get out and get tourism into the rest of the into those smaller places, both in USA and Canada and the tribal nations.
All right, Dan, close us off.
Yeah, I actually think this could be the project for Canada, US, and the North America that maybe changes the tone a bit, in my view, because in the Pacific Northwest, PNWER in particular, the Border Policy Research Institute, Lori Troutman and the gang down there, Solomon Wong and everybody else, like, this is the region that manages the Canada-US border and has the experience and the expertise, and that we all learn from, you know, those of us in Detroit, Windsor, and Buffalo, Niagara, et cetera. So here you have a premier event. The success of Canada-US always comes from pilot projects. So here would be the time to kind of roll some things out that we can do effectively and work together. And I hate to say it, but it's also something the president likes, right? Like, you know, he's already out there like holding trophies and everything, and all of those kind of things. So, you know, this is something where we can build some momentum around that. Hey, maybe it isn't, you know, just, you know, neighbors fighting all the time, and we can do some things. On the flip side, if we don't do it right, it could be a big problem, right? So, and so I think we got to get this one right, but there's nowhere better to do that than here. I think because of the experience and expertise. And again, it kind of feeds into that narrative I was saying, where I think you're going to see kind of the movement of Canada-US's focus to this part of the world really quickly. And hopefully it's a tone setter for us. And I think that the future is bright from that perspective.
That is great. Well, let's give a huge round of applause to this awesome panel. Really informative. And thank you all so much.